This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hi, I'm Brent Butterworth, editor of SoundStage Solo.
And I'm Dennis Berger, editor of SoundStage Access.
And this is the SoundStage Audiophile podcast, a twice a month or every other week or something examination of the most important things that are going on in the world of consumer audio.
Absolutely. What are we talking about this week, Brent?
Well, we're going to start off with an article that you found in the new, the new old Creem magazine. That's Creem, which was a very, very leading rock magazine back in the 70s, maybe the 80s, I don't know.
Yeah.
And which I used to read, but someone has resurrected it, and they have a really cool article here called Sacred Bones Resurrects the Objectively Greatest Audio Format, the 8-track.
And they go into happen.
That had to happen. And they go into a little bit of an examination of it, and they talk about actual new 8-track tapes that are being released. Unbelievably. So assuming we actually finish that discussion, what are we going to do next?
Yeah. Well, you had cued me into the fact that AudioXpress did their August issue on acoustics. So I thought we'd dig into that and talk about room acoustics a bit, because we touched on it to a degree, but we haven't really dug into it. And I think this issue gives us a chance to, say some things that you and I both have to say about acoustics.
I think you summed up the entire consumer audio publication status, about acoustics, is that, they've touched on it a bit.
Yeah. Well, it's very important.
It's very important. It's more important than this, but not as important as that. And we're going to dig into some stuff. All right.
Yeah. So what are we going to wrap up with?
We're going to wrap up with an article by this guy, Dennis Berger.
Yeah, it's me.
From SoundStage Access. That's called "What Do Our Future AI Overlords Think About Hi-Fi?" Mm-hmm. And you have become like the master of this AI generated illustration thing, which we've been using a lot for SoundStage. Mm-hmm. And you started, kind of exploring what the AI thinks about our hobby. And, the AI, if you say to the AI, give me a drawing of a truck driver, it'll give you a drawing of what it thinks truck drivers look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so you did the same sort of exploration with audiophiles.
Mm-hmm. Well, an audiophile product, largely prompted by you.
Products, yeah.
So that's going to be a fun conversation. Especially since it was, I wrote it a month ago and the world has moved on since then. So much has changed. So it's going to be interesting to talk about how rapidly all of this is evolving. I mean, it is.
Really?
Oh, God, it's I
didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Way more advanced now, but we'll dig into that. But let's talk about this article from Creem first.
Cool. Okay.
So, yeah.
So you're the one that turned me on to this article. You want to describe it a little bit?
Yeah, Creem is back. We should say that. It's pretty exciting to be. We've got a magazine actually dedicated to rock and roll again, which we haven't had one of those in a long time. But
there's rock and roll still?
Yeah, there's apparently rock and roll still. But yeah, this article came up. Sacred Bones. Sacred Bones, by the way, is a label. Mm-hmm. Sacred Bones resurrects the objectively greatest audio format, the 8-track.
And where is Sacred Bones based?
Brooklyn, isn't it? I think.
Of course.
Yeah, North Brooklyn.
It would have to be Brooklyn. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the funny thing is, I'm reading this article and it's just like, I think I was probably 90% of the way through the article before I really decided whether or not I thought it was satire, which is to me just the great thing about Creem. There's this spirit of rebelliousness that I dig, but anyway, I just want to read these couple of lines that really grabbed me, that made me love this article, whether it was serious or not. So it starts off, just drink it in. you ever hear music this good? Listen to how good that sounds. and they're talking about listening to 8-track, and then somebody else says, yeah, the haunting quality of the warble. This is the best way to consume music. I mean, what do you think? What other ways are there? You can listen to your telephone, but that's weird. Records are really flat. You have to flip them over. It goes on and on like this, and I just thought it was hilarious. But it brought back to mind for me some work that you've done for other publications about the revival of cassettes, but also an old Home Theater magazine article, which in the 90s you did a roundup of 8-track players, which, I mean,
all of them bought at flea markets. One of them bought off a homeless guy in New York. I think one of them dug out of the trash because you couldn't buy new ones even back then, much less now.
Yeah. So where are you going to buy them now?
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, we do have a place to buy brand new 8-track tapes. Just not 8-track players. So maybe they should have thought of that first.
So aren't they releasing new 8-tracks now, this label?
Yes, by Townes Van Zandt. So there's already 2 of them available on their website. And that's actually what made me realize that there was something serious about this article. It's like you read it and you're like, is this a joke? And then you go and Google Sacred Bones Records, and no, they have a Sacred 8s tab, and you can buy Townes Van Zandt 8-tracks. There are 2 right now. I think there are like 5 more on the way.
How much are they?
$30.
Oh, that's a little steep.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem with it. The expense.
Well, although I guess if you calculate because I think I used to pay about $7 or $8 for an 8-track, for a new 8-track, something like that in the 70s. And so if you figure based on inflation, that's probably a fair price. I'm kind of curious though that where are people going to buy an 8-track player to play these things on?
I looked on AudioGone, man, and I found a lot of people selling 8-track tapes, but no 8-track players. I found reel-to-reel players. I found a good number of cassette players, but no 8-track players. So that's an interesting question. Yeah.
But I looked on eBay, and on eBay, there were a lot of players. And my experience has been buying used tape machines of any sort, especially 8-track, which was always a mechanically very, very dicey format. The tapes wouldn't last forever. The tapes would, the little thing that holds them together in the middle that makes the electrical contact, so it does the ka-chunk sound. That thing comes loose, and you can't really splice it too easily because the tape gets kind of wrapped upon itself, and they're kind of nearly impossible to repair. And when we did that 8-track shootout in Home Theater magazine, that was 1997. Most of those players didn't work, or they halfway worked. And I think finding one that works now would be really difficult. You have to buy a few. And even if the owner tests it and says it works fine, a lot of these things, I've had old cassette decks that I've tried to do things with, and they're working fine for an hour and then they die.
Yeah. I think probably your best bet would be to find to maybe scour the bulletin board or something like that and find somebody selling a 1977 Ford F-150 and just gamble that maybe it's got an 8-track player hooked to the underside of the dashboard with L brackets. There you go. That's how you're going to find your new 8-track player.
Yeah, although the truck, you could get the truck running. Pretty much guaranteed you could get that truck running.
Yeah.
But the 8-track player, very questionable. I know that Gordon Sauk, who runs Innovative Audio up in Vancouver, I know, he's talked to me about 8-tracks, and he's got a couple players in his store usually because they do, vintage audio. And I know if I ask Gordon, hey, I need an 8-track player that works, he would find me one, and his technicians could get one working, but that's a rare thing. And then you can't buy new tapes at all, to my knowledge. I don't know where they're getting the tapes to record these new releases.
There's a great paragraph here, and I don't know if it's satire or not, but let me read this. Bratton says that anyone who's making new 8-tracks now, like Sacred 8, is actually just dubbing over old ones, or they've somehow gotten a hold on the stash of blanks. And there's a quote. There's another thing for you, he says. 8-tracks, very sustainable because they're not making any new parts for them. So it's all recycled.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
Yeah. These are not going to end up in a landfill. Well, they might someday, but whereas if you go buy a Bluetooth speaker now, then it's going to be in a landfill one day.
Yeah.
There's no question about it because the battery will die and you can't really replace the batteries in most cases. Nope. So you'll just throw it away and it'll end up in a landfill. Whereas the 8-track player can, in theory, be fixed. Mm-hmm. And the players, the actual tapes, they're almost impossible to repair, though.
Could you bake them?
Yeah, you could. You could. But the problem is that the tapes, for those who don't know, 8-track is like this. It's a system where the tape winds up. It's just one reel inside there, and it winds upon itself. And so the tape that you're hearing that goes across the heads is coming out of the middle of the reel. Mm-hmm. And so it comes out of the middle of the reel, it goes, and then it winds itself back onto the outer part of the reel. Mm-hmm. And so unlike, say, a cassette tape where you can pull the thing open and you can go splice any part of the tape that you want to, with 8-track, I guess you could do it, but you need to have a lot of time on your hands and a lot of patience and a lot of fine motor skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to place a bet here. I'm going to bet that there will not be an 8-track revival.
It's funny though. It's so often we take the flaws of a medium and become nostalgic about those flaws. I mean, to me, God, I don't know why I'm telling this story because this is going to give you ammunition to make fun of me for years. But like, there's something.
I have plenty of that already.
I know that's true, but there's just something to me. I expect a kerchunk in the middle of Freebird. To this day, I hear Freebird and I expect to hear kerchunk in the middle of it.
Are you kidding me? Did they break Freebird?
They broke Freebird
in the middle?
In the middle, yes. On the 8-track.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you get for listening to Leonard Skinner.
Yeah.
But I remember, just as bad is there was some Kiss record I had where they would break the track in the middle, and I'm pretty sure that Rush, All the World's a Stage, which is a favorite 8-track of mine back in the day, given how long Rush's songs are, I'm going to guess there were probably would be a break there too.
Yeah.
But it took me years to get over that too. Yeah. But when I finally switched from 8-track to cassette back in 82 or something like that, 83, I finally did it. Mm-hmm. I would still listen to songs and expect that ka-chunk. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a good format that we're done with. But what should happen here is one of the more hipster audio companies, like let's say Zoo Audio, should probably the ZU Audio should probably. So they do super super cool demos, and it's always like with crazy stuff and really obscure records and things, and they should probably use 8-track for their demo.
Yeah,
that'd be hilarious, and they probably do it just for fun. You need a good supply of 8-tracks because you need a couple of players. You need probably 3 players and a bunch of tapes because how long they're going to last.
Yeah. I have to say, though, you've hit on something for me that's just probably the coolest part about all of this is that if not for this article, I don't think I ever would have heard of Sacred Bones Records. So this is great publicity. And I'm looking through their catalog and it's like, man, they've got some really wicked cool artists and they're doing some really cool releases. And would I ever buy one of their 8-tracks? Hell no. But I'm glad I know about Sacred Bones now. So, mission accomplished, I guess. They're doing some really cool stuff with like, John Carpenter's score soundtracks and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's just some really, really, really cool releases. Look. Yeah. So check them out. So
cool. Okay, you want to move on to our next topic?
I actually want to take a break first. You want to do that?
Let's take a break, and then we'll be back in a minute and move on to acoustics.
Yeah. And welcome back to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Dennis Berger.
And I'm Brent Butterworth.
And for the second segment, we're going to be talking about the August issue of AudioXpress magazine. Brent, you brought this to my attention that I believe this is an annual thing where every August, every August issue, they talk about acoustics.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been an acoustics issue since we started this podcast, so it's a good opportunity to talk about the subject and opine a bit and talk about some cool new developments we saw in this magazine. But yeah, why don't you start this off, because you're the one that actually brought this issue to the discussion. So why did you want to talk about acoustics?
So I should point out AudioXpress. It's AudioXpress. Is a magazine. It's not that well-known audio magazine, but it's well-known to engineers and the more technical people in any aspect of the audio industry, consumer, professional, industrial, whatever. And so they have a lot of sort of technical deep dives on subjects, and they also kind of keep you abreast of a lot of things going on in the audio world that you may not be aware of. So they do every August, I guess, they do an issue on acoustics, and they feature a lot of new acoustical products. And they also had a great article in here by Dr. Richard Honeycutt, which goes through the history of acoustics, going all the way back to
ancient Greece.
To ancient Greece.
That's about as far back as you could go. So,
but more back into like about 100 years ago, when a lot of the original experimentation started to happen. When people were starting to have big meeting spaces and trying to figure out how to get the space designed to where people could hear music or speak or speech or whatever clearly. And so it's really fascinating to me how this is, we get so wrapped up in consumer stuff, but the market for acoustics is primarily for commercial and industrial spaces. So for offices, restaurants, things like that. And
museums, that's a huge part of it. Yeah, my friend Steve Haas, I think that's a lot of what he does is just acoustical treatments for museums. And
so I wanted to mention there were two things in here that really stood out to me. There's a company called Shion, SHION, that's making adaptable acoustic treatment panels that are active, that actually have a transducer in there. So the panel is a transducer. And they are getting, so it actually tracks your position. The system tracks your position in the room and adjusts the room acoustics to be optimal for where you are. And it does all this automatically. And it has up to 11 dB of active noise cancellation. So I'm looking at this going like, God, this has got to be really expensive. However, this could really work.
Yeah.
This is really interesting, and I have to note that it's being distributed by Vanna Limited, which is a high-end audio consumer products distribution company in the U.S. here. And so I'm thinking, God, this would be great for high-end audio because, well, it's a big investment, but it'll work. It'll do things, which not everything you buy in high-end audio actually does something.
Yeah, and
this would produce audible effects, and it would be. This is potentially a sort of next level thing in high-end audio that could really deliver a real result at colossal expense and complexity.
Yeah.
But still, it's something. And then there was another company called Flex Acoustics, which is making, now these panels are just for commercial installations. They're, I think, if I remember correctly, they are about 2.5 meters by 2/3 of a meter, so they're big. But they have slots in there, and they're motorized, so the motors can control the slots in there, and they open the slots to make them into absorbers, and they close the slots to make them into diffusers.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really fascinating that people are starting to do this. Now, however, though, this made me, it's just sort of like when people talk about a car, you see that car everywhere for the next week, right?
Yeah.
It just you become aware of it. So if people started talking about acoustics, and I started seeing more mentions of acoustics on Facebook and in audio publications. And I wanted to kind of dig into that and how would you sum up the the statements, the research, the position, etc., of audio publications on the subject of room acoustics.
Are you talking about consumer?
Yeah, consumer.
Well, I mean, I would say probably the most oft-used phrase in that respect is, the room is the most important part of your audio system. I mean, I've seen a lot of advice in this arena, a lot of it conflicting. I've seen a lot of people treat it like if you don't have a treated room, then you might as well just be listening to an old boombox. I've seen other people, our friend Steve Guttenberg, he's got these really beautiful acoustic treatments on his wall, and you can see them in every video he does. And I think his attitude towards them are, well, they sure do look pretty, don't they? And I have to agree with them. They're gorgeous. But you made a point to me recently that just to me sums up the whole thing. I haven't seen a lot of discussion about actual studies that demonstrate what user preference is in terms of acoustically treated rooms. So
which is ultimately what matters. And if you look at that Dr. Richard Honeycutt article in AudioXpress, he talks about how they found 100 years ago or whatever that you need if speech is the priority, then you need basically a flat reverberation time. In other words, the time it takes for the sound to decay by 60 decibels is the reverberation time. And it's typically measured in it's a second or 2 seconds or half a second or whatever. So he says that basically this is science 100 years ago or whatever told us that if the a flat acoustical or a flat reverberation time that's similar at every frequency is better for speech, whereas with music you want more reverberation time in the low frequencies to give it more of a rich kind of sound. But we don't see that when audio publications, consumer audio publications review acoustics products. The acoustics manufacturer sends them some products and they put them up on the walls and it sounds probably better than what they had, which might have been nothing.
Yeah.
Or and the writer's just like, oh, these are great. And there's very little analysis. There's no measurements. I think I've seen one or two. I think I've seen 2 measurements of acoustical products, one of which was done by me and one of which was done by Cal Rubinson at Stereophile, of products that they actually tested. There's no analysis. It's just like it's different, therefore better, and it may indeed be better. But I'm taking audio publications to task here for basically repeatedly insisting that acoustics are so important, but absolutely refusing to take the issue seriously.
Yeah.
And there's just, like you said, there's no data. And and even everyone has their opinions, and you get even into acoustics pros, and they have their opinions about what is right and what is wrong. I did a tour one time with a company called Cat MBX, which makes super, super high-end custom speakers for home theaters and music rooms and things like that. And so I probably saw 12 or 15, or it was less than 20, but more than 12. I can't remember. Rooms that were done by this company. I think every single one of them they had an acoustician working on it. And the speakers, performed really well. The systems were all really high-end speakers, really well designed. They all had good electronics, hooked up to them. But the room sounded different. And some of the, actually Steve Haas, the guy you just mentioned, had done a couple of them, and his rooms all sounded great. But there were some of the rooms sounded really dead, almost more like a recording studio control room environment. And I really think there needs to be more. I was going to say, I think there needs to be more codification of what works and what doesn't, except, of course, as usual in audio, Dr. Floyd Toole answered this question a decade ago for us, and everyone ignored him.
Nearly 15 years ago. I think it was 2008. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Dr. Floyd Toole is arguably the most famous audio scientist alive, and he's got a book called Sound Reproduction: The Acoustics and Psychoacoustics of Loudspeakers and Rooms. And he actually deals with this. And I was shocked. When I first read this, I was shocked at how sort of simple his approach was. And, he talks about how, you need to have people a lot of times think the sidewalls are the most important thing, but he says they're not. The most important thing is to have absorption on the wall behind your speakers.
Mhm.
And it has to be at least 4 inches thick, because with acoustics, the thicker the product, the lower the frequency it'll work at. And if you buy those like 2-inch thick wedge foam panels that you find at a lot of pro audio stores, those have they are not very effective in the range of the human voice, but they roll off all the trebles. They absorb all the treble and they leave the mid range, and it makes voices sound really shouty. They're terrible. I can't believe they still sell these products, but of course they're skinny and they're cheap and people can easily tack them up. Whereas to get treatments that really work, they have to be big. Yeah. But he basically prescribes, get 4-inch panels and put a bunch of them on your back wall, 4-inch thick panels behind your speakers. And you can do on sidewalls, you can absorb it if it's home theater. If it's music, don't absorb it. Or if it's both, probably don't absorb it. Just put a diffuser there, and then put diffusers in the back with a little bit of absorption in the back. And I called Dr. Toole because I was writing about his article, and his first response was, "Wait, you read that?" That's second. Yeah. I think he's very disappointed that he did this awesome work, and it is so often conveniently ignored by people who have their own agenda. Yeah. But anyway, so he came over to my house, and because I lived really near where he lived at the time, and he came over. He looked at my room. He's like, "Okay," because I had these fancy architectural sort of panels that had all the different angles and things, and they were, I want to say, they were 5 inches thick, 4 inches thick. And he said, "Those are excellent tweeter diffusers. You need to move them out to where they're 8 inches. The front of them is 8 inches away from the wall. Then it'll diffuse mid range."
Oh, wow.
I was like, "Oh, okay." So I actually ended up building a whole new set of diffusers from concrete, those concrete forming tubes that you can buy at Home Depot.
Yeah.
But the only thing is, the ones they sell at Home Depot are not really big enough. You really need, I can't remember I think I got a 16-inch wide one from a professional supply place, and cut it in half, and I made several of those big diffusers. They were easy to make and they worked great. And I took a bunch of 4-inch thick wedge foam and I crammed it all together and made it to where it was like this 5-inch thick panel, and my room sounded fantastic.
Yeah.
And it took him not 5 minutes to analyze my room with just looking at it. And that's another thing that I think we should talk about, is that we keep talking about how important room acoustics are, but we don't talk about how not important they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does. My thing, and this is, I know I sound like a broken record when I say this because I'm constantly saying this, but for me, it's all about distractions. For me, it's about, is there anything that is taking my attention away from my music? And, in large part, I think you have to ask the question, is there something about this room that is distracting you? If there is, fix it. If there's not every room needs to be super treated. And I also think we underlook the importance of things like bookshelves. My wife and I could run a library out of our house. We have bookshelves in every room and covering most walls. And to be honest with you, it's kind of just about the only acoustical treatment we really need. Now, granted, in our media room, things would probably be better if we had some bass traps, but use room correction for that up to the sort of crossover frequency of the room, and then I don't use room correction above that. But yeah, I think we overlook how good bookshelves are as acoustical treatments. And yeah, so. Don't necessarily take people's word when they say you have to have an acoustically treated room. Yes, room acoustics are super, super important, but that doesn't mean you have to do something about it. Depending on your decorations, your interior design, it could be that your room is perfectly fine. And if you're listening to it and you're not hearing, smearing or what have you, if there's not something that's drawing your attention away from your music, then, well, is it absolutely necessary that you need to do something about it? I have to say, I think the speaker is probably a lot more important in most cases.
I think so too. There are bad rooms. I remember when I worked for Dolby, we went and did a bunch of demos in Shanghai, and at the Shanghai International Audio Video Show or whatever, and we were in this giant like conference room, that held probably, I would just take a wild guess and say 70 people, and so we did these demos, and they had wood paneling all over the walls. So I'm looking at this wood paneling going, and I'm asking my Chinese colleagues, I'm like, can we go buy some, acoustic treatment foam? And they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I start like drawing pictures of what it looks like. And they're like, no. We don't have, look, they're like, Brent, this is China. You can't just go buy anything you want. And then I started being like, well, can we just get like raw foam? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, and I start pushing down on a chair to show like the chair cushion, like that. And they're just like, maybe. And we went and scoured Shanghai to try to find. We just couldn't find anything.
Wow.
And so the next year we shipped a whole bunch of acoustic treatment products to the room, and I think we had like 2x2, foam panels. I think they were like those pyramid type panels, and we found some cardboard, and we sort of tack glued a bunch of the things onto the cardboard panels and put them up on the sides of the room. And we did our big fancy Dolby demo with DVD audio and Pro Logic 2 and stuff like that. And after the demo, people would come up. They wouldn't come up and ask us questions about the sound. They'd go up and poke their fingers at the foam panels.
So maybe for people who've never really experienced this before, talk about what you were hearing in that room in Shanghai before you put the foam up. Like what?
It was you would hear your voice echoing off of the walls. You'd hear your voice slapping back off of the walls, and you get flutter echo. And flutter echo is when you have things that are happens with voices, but it's even more so with high frequencies. If you start, I remember I had an apartment in New York that had wood floors and a normal ceiling, and when I'd sit there eating my breakfast with my spoon in the bowl, and the spoon would click against the bowl, you'd hear it bounce back and forth between the ceiling and the floor. It go and it drove me nuts. And so you want to get rid of things like that, and which we did. And that room ended up sounding tolerable the second year. The first year I was just trying to find. We were putting cardboard. I think I made some cardboard columns or something that we decorated with posters to try to just break up some of the reflections, but it was rough. So flutter echo is a really bad thing. And there are a lot of residential environments now that have no or very few absorptive surfaces. Maybe they have no rug, or maybe they have a really thin, like, Persian rug that doesn't absorb a lot of sound. And maybe they have very little on the walls, and maybe they have leather furniture, which isn't that absorptive. And in rooms like that, you really need to look at what some of these companies are doing with artwork, where they have you get the artwork printed and it's on an acoustical panel. Yeah. And that will be a giant improvement over, nothing at all. Yeah. And you may not be able to get the room optimal, but just putting up a few things like that, the room will just sound so much better. I mean, didn't you ever go into like school rooms, and some school rooms just sounded really bad and echoey, and you just walk in the room and you just be like, oh God, this room sounds really bad. Yeah. And I've heard recordings done in rooms like that. I have a great Veena recording, which is a South Indian instrument. And the guy who's like the best Veena player, a lot of his recordings are terrible. And some of them were, there's one I have they're just like destroyed it, man. They're so good. But they're recording in like just some crappy conference room or something that's just like nothing but horrible room tone. Yeah. And so anyway,
one of the things that I don't think we talk about enough, though, is like when you say acoustics, they're really sort of two different domains. One is, the sound interacting with the surfaces, but the other is sound leaving your space and entering your space. When I started with SoundStage, I basically sort of redid my 2-channel setup in my office, my home office where I write. And one of the biggest acoustic problems that I have now, and granted, I've got bookshelves here and there, and I've got, good absorption behind, but one of the biggest problems that I'm having that I need to rectify is I'm a lot closer to my window now, and so I have road noise coming in. And one of my biggest acoustical treatments that I'm planning for is replacing this window with like a triple pane window. That's probably going to be the biggest acoustics upgrade I've ever done.
That's a good point.
People don't often talk about that, so that's important. That's a lot more of a distraction for me than I probably need to move my diffuser where my first reflection on the right side of the room is, like back a foot and a half or something like that, but it doesn't really distract me. So is that a big concern? But this window, big concern. So that's my number one acoustics project that I've got to work on, replace this damn window. So.
That's a really, really, really good point that I think it's overlooked a lot. So I would like to conclude by saying, I think this is important for sound quality, but I'm disappointed in, certainly on the consumer side of the industry, just how the publications don't treat it seriously. They don't dig deep into it. They don't talk about the stuff that Dr. Toole talks about in his book, where he's saying that, hey, look, this thing has to be X thick to actually work at these frequencies. Otherwise, that's just the laws of physics. Mm-hmm. And people just ignore that and just go, and some guy makes a cool looking panel and they see it at a show and go, oh, I could review those. And they review them and it's like, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
And that's the status of, consumer audio publications reviewing acoustics products at this point. And I just really think we could do better.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to take a break?
I do.
All right, let's take a break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Cool. And we are back. I am Brent Butterworth.
And I am Dennis Berger.
And we are going to wrap up this segment with a really, what we hope will be a fascinating discussion. It's certainly a fascinating topic. And it's about an article that Dennis wrote for SoundStageAccess.com titled, What Do Our Future AI Overlords Think About Hi-Fi? So Dennis, would you like to, I still am struggling to understand all of this stuff. I know that I will introduce, before you do a deep dive here, I will say Dennis has been exploring, the subject of AI generated images. Like you tell an AI, artificial intelligence system, hey, I want an image of, a fish riding a bicycle down a mountain. And it comes up with that, right?
Yeah.
So what have you been, and we have actually run some of these illustrations on various SoundStage sites. So dig us a little deeper into this and tell us what you have done recently.
Well, I talk a little bit about this at the beginning of the article, but it's becoming harder and harder to illustrate anything that's not a review, right? Sometimes you're grasping for images, and man, copyright trolls are just ruining everything. I've heard that our friends over at Copper Magazine are having problems with copyright trolls with images. My former employer is having problems, and so I've been looking I'm looking at these image generation neural networks as a way to create imagery for a story that is original, that is, I own the copyright or SoundStage owns the copyright or what have you. And so 2 months ago, I started digging into one that I had to run on a Google Colab machine, and it's all like hand coding. And I had come up with some pretty rudimentary images, and they were fine. They worked, whatever. This field is advancing so quickly that a month's time is just like, I said in my article, it was like in the course of a month, it was like going from Atari 2600 to PlayStation 5. But looking back now, no, it was like it was like Atari 2600 to Nintendo. And then the next month was like Nintendo to PlayStation 5. Of course, by next month, I'll have to revise that again. But all of this is developing so quickly. So when I wrote this article at the beginning of August, I think it was, I had just gotten my hands on MidJourney, which was last month the neural network that everybody was talking about in terms of image generation. And maybe we want to explain how these things work a little bit. Do you think that's interesting at all?
I think that would be good.
So a lot of it comes from, it actually started as just the opposite. It started as a way of taking an image and generating a textual description of that image to help with accessibility on the web. So many people upload images. They don't put any sort of metadata or in them or anything like that. So these neural networks were trained to go and look at an image and go, oh, that is a picture of a fish riding a bicycle down a mountain, whatever, right? And eventually the script got flipped to where you could take the language, give them language, and they would give you an image in return. And they work by a process called diffusion, which is sort of hard to wrap your brain around, but here's a very bad description of it. Imagine you're in the shower and you've got the little drops of water on that, and occasionally you'll look at a series of drops of water and you'd be like, that kind of looks like a face, right? These things start with noise, and you could think of those as the equivalent of the drops of water, and they add noise and filter noise until basically they start to make an image congeal out of that noise. They're shaping noise, for lack of a better way of putting it, to sort of match the images or match the words that you're giving it. So when you say you want, a bike riding a bicycle down a mountain, it's looking for patterns in that noise that it starts to recognize as being evocative of those words, and it's shaping that noise until eventually, after, billions and billions and billions of iterations of that noise, you come up with an image that looks like something. So when I started sharing this with you I was sort of sharing it with you thinking you would, hey, I've got this story, like, help me do an image with this. But you sort of prompted me to, hey, let's poke this thing and see what it thinks about hi-fi. And that ended up being a cool idea for an article. So this article never would have happened without you. But long and short of it is, these things are all based on patterns. It's pattern recognition. It's pattern synthesis. And what I realized, disappointingly for me, is these neural networks think our hobby is kind of boring, man. I could give me images of bicycles, and it's giving me, penny farthings. It's giving me recumbents. And these are all different iterations, but there's so much variety in so many other fields of interest. And our field of interest, there's no variety here. It's just all black boxes with black knobs, and the speakers are all just rectilinear things with drivers shoved in them. And the point that I'm making this article is that the headline is sort of facetious, because these neural networks don't really actually think anything, but the pattern that I'm recognizing in this pattern recognition data is that our hobby is sort of visually stale. I'm not seeing anything in any of these generations of speakers that I would think anybody would go, damn, I want that in my house, right? I'm not seeing any of these stereo receivers that it's generating that look like anything different from a stereo receiver that could have existed in the 70s.
So this is all like box speakers from the 1970s and stereo receivers from the 1970s. Why does this thing think we're stuck in the 1970s? Because there's a lot of better speakers, better looking speakers out there now than that.
So, here's my hypothesis on that. MidJourney in particular was trained on something like 60 terabytes worth of images, and most of that is, sort of public domain stuff. The training data gets updated occasionally, and when you look at different neural networks, they're trained with different data, but I still think it has to be, they're looking for patterns, they're looking for commonalities. This thing is not taking and copying, pasting elements of different images and putting them together. It's rendering its idea of what the object is that you're describing. And I think for large part, maybe I've never seen any electrostatic speakers in any of the renderings I've done when I just asked for speakers. And I think maybe it's just because it doesn't necessarily, it's either it doesn't understand that those are speakers, or it's that they are just statistically noise, right? So they don't in any way help it sort of understand the concept of what a speaker is. But for me, the question I have is this indicative of the sort of mass consciousness perception of this? I mean, really, when you think about it, these things are reliant on people going and tagging an image with words that it can then interpret, right? So is this just indicative of the fact that normal people sort of think this about these speakers? It's just like you go to a person on a street and go, what's a speaker? And they're just going to describe this, because that's sort of how all of this works, is tying images to words. So
yeah, I mean, and of course, this thing knows that something looks like a speaker because people have told it that's what a speaker looks like. And I guess if you got 100 people into a room and said, draw a picture of a speaker, they'd probably draw something that looks kind of like an old Pioneer speaker from 1975.
Yeah.
And maybe I would too.
Right. But the interesting thing for me, though, is you ask it to draw a bicycle, and there's just so much variety. I mean, it's weird. You ask it to draw a bicycle, and one time it may look like an image from like 1887, and the next image it spits out may look like it's from the future. So why are we not seeing that in terms of audio? And I think it is a perception thing. So. I mean, look, one of the things I'm trying to do with SoundStage Access is not preach to the choir. I'm trying to get out on the street corner and evangelize, right? And so I have to think about where's the inertia? Where are the roadblocks to reaching new people and bring them into this hobby? And look, I don't think most people want products that look like these products that the AI is spitting out sitting in their living room.
Because they don't make products that look like that anymore, hardly.
Yeah.
People people go buy Sonos now.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Or something similar to that. Speakers that are small and are kind of nicely designed and don't look obtrusive in a room and don't take up a colossal amount of space. That's what people buy now. And yet somehow the perception of what a speaker is has not changed to reflect that.
Yeah. So like I said, I don't know if any of this is conclusive, but I'm looking into, a system that organizes and synthesizes patterns, and I'm seeing patterns that are, to me, a little disappointing. So,
yeah, well, maybe that'll change as more people get involved with this, or maybe not. I don't really know, but I would say go look at Dennis's article on soundstageaccess.com, and you can see some of these images and judge for yourself.
Yeah, what's funny is I'm looking through I turned this in early August, so I guess, a little over a month ago, and I'm looking at it and going, God, these images look archaic. Like, we have advanced so far since then.
Yeah.
And I talked about all of the different, neural networks that are doing the image generation and sort of mentioned the big ones. And like at the time, a month ago, Stable Diffusion wasn't even on my radar, and now Stable Diffusion is the neural network that everybody's talking about.
Wow.
So it's crazy how fast all of this is advancing. It might be fun to rerun this experiment like a month from now and see if the results are any different. Maybe update this article. I don't know, but
Yeah, you'll see like a young woman with a lot of tattoos listening to a Sonos system, probably.
Maybe. Anyway, anything else you want to say about this one, man?
No, I found it fascinating and hilarious. So.
Oh, hey, I've done some images for some of your stories. I did a hog being washed in the style of Miyazaki to represent hogwash when you were writing about, and like how would we have illustrated that article otherwise? I don't know.
We just would have put a picture of something that we got from some manufacturer, probably.
Right. Yeah. And run the risk of being sued for it. That's the danger.
Oh, that's true. Because that article was a little bit on the negative side.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think this tool is gonna change. Yeah, not drastically, but to a degree, change the way journalism works. I mean, look, I thought for the longest time that it was going to be little, small publications like ours using this tool.
Yeah.
But I noticed last month when The Atlantic did a story about Alex Jones, they illustrated it with MidJourney, the same AI that I'm using here. And it's like, man, if even The Atlantic is doing it now, man, illustrators are in trouble. But
they are.
Yeah. No.
So you want to wrap this thing up?
Yeah,
Move on?
Yeah, you want to do some credits?
Yeah, let's do some credits.
All right. We should. What? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I was gonna jump in with some credits.
We'll do it.
I want to make sure that the people that I want recognized are recognized and appreciated for their contributions. And by the people, I mean you and me.
Yeah.
So this is a production of Butterburger Productions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is the overall entity here is SoundStage Networks, which is you can find at soundstage.com. It's a network of 9 microsites dealing with different aspects of consumer audio.
Mm-hmm. And who did the music this episode?
I guess the music will be by me and probably with some contributions from my friends Ron Seiger and Dan Gonda.
Cool.
And what else do we have to talk about?
I don't think we got anything else, man. I think we could wrap this up and
that's all the credits we have. We don't have an executive producer. We don't have a.
I guess me, or you, or us. Butterburger, man. Butterburger. That covers it all.
Yeah, that kind of covers it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yet another stellar episode.